Hello, fellow A-pushers. No, we will not be breaking bad this unit. However, we might actually start to see the colonies break a little bit bad by the time we get to the end of it, but we'll get to that. This unit, we will be covering the development of colonial America. This will take us from the first English settlers of the southern colonies, to the Puritans of New England, and finally to the diverse middle colonies. We'll stop right before the 7 Years' War / French and Indian War of 1754. This unit's content themes revolve around how the British North American colonies developed politically, socially, and economically. It's important to emphasize how similar and different the colonies were from each other. Politically, they were far from a democracy we have today, but many of the colonies exhibited a proto-democracy such as the New England town halls or the Virginia House of Burgesses. However, please underscore how limiting a democracy it was for many people other than white landowning men. Socially, the colonies retained much of their sense of British identity, yet were more upwardly mobile, at least compared to Europe. However, clear social distinctions still existed in the colonies, such as the aristocratic plantation owners of the South, the indentured servants, the rising middle class of the coastal towns, and the poor farmers in the western frontier of the colonies. While there might have been some early forms of toleration of differences in places like Rhode Island or Pennsylvania, social mobility and rights were limited for Native Americans, women, and African Americans. Lastly, emphasize the differences between how the colonies were structured economically. The southern colonies with their reliance on cash crops, New England with the strong merchant class and trading, and the middle colonies that reflected a bit of both types of economies. Perhaps most importantly, our other content theme that connects to economics is the development of labor systems in the colonies, most notably indentured servitude and African slavery. Highlight to scholars why indentured servants were first used and how the problems within that system led to farmers turning to African slavery. As I said in Unit 1, slavery is unfortunately a fundamental part of United States history, and explaining the origins of slavery becoming increasingly racially codified and hierarchical becomes more important the further we delve into the course. For our skill themes, we will be focusing on having scholars write their first essay in class. Hopefully scholars will be familiar with writing essays from last year. If they are not, this will act as an introduction to essay writing for those who need it, as well as a reteach for those already familiar with the process. The last Unit 1 lesson ended with introducing the thesis. While we will still be working on the thesis in this unit, as well as the whole year, we will also be going over how to write an effective main body paragraph. The way I teach it is quite simple. Scholars need to have evidence that back up their arguments. Each main body paragraph is an organization category of SPICE. Social, political, interactions between humans and their environments, think migration and geography, cultural, and finally, economics. This is what AP World History uses, and I stole it from them for good reason. Not only do the kids already know it, but I think it's actually a pretty effective means of teaching categories and writing essays. Scholars will be using these organizational categories to write their main body paragraphs and to prove their thesis. For each paragraph, there should be 3 pieces of evidence that help them prove their argument. The first sentence of the main body paragraph should set up which one of the SPICE categories scholars will use. Each piece of evidence should have at least 2 sentences. The first sentence is an explanation of what the evidence is, so this sentence is pretty straightforward. The second sentence is where they must explain how the evidence proves whatever their argument is. It's in this second sentence where the critical thinking and analysis lies, and it's in this sentence where scholars will clarify how their evidence backs up their thesis. Lastly, if you want to, you can teach using a concluding sentence. I usually don't because A, it's a bit redundant, and B, we're crunched for time, and really, you've already got all the information you need. So I have it up here as optional, but really, I would expect 7 sentences for a main body paragraph. So if a scholar has an opening sentence, 3 pieces of evidence, and 2 sentences per evidence, each main body paragraph should come out to, like I said, about 7 sentences. If your scholars are like mine, to some of them that will be an extraordinary number, but it's important to set the standard high, and you'll be surprised at how scholars can meet that standard by the end of the year. For our inquiry questions, I'd like to focus on encouraging a debate that is broader than just APUSH. Discussing with scholars what bias is and how people are biased is a cornerstone of understanding the complexity of history. We did some work with this in Unit 1, but I'd encourage you to continue focusing on it. It will make your scholars better writers and critical thinkers. In Stage 2, one of our summatives this unit will cover all three aspects of the AP exam. The test will have an MC, SAQ, and a compare-contrast essay. This will be the first essay of the year, so you might want to be more lenient with scholars' writings than you would normally be at the end of the year. I really try to concentrate on if scholars have the basic format of how to write an essay, and I place a slightly less emphasis on the content. One way to adapt the grade is to modify the existing rubric and just change the grade scale. If an essay score of 4 in your class would normally get an 80, then maybe a 4 earns a 90 for this first essay. Please just be patient with scholars as they are learning the ropes. It will pay off at the end of the year. In teaching a CC essay, make sure that scholars understand what this particular skill is targeting. A good CC essay should be able to explain how something is similar and different, but should also be able to explain why they are similar and different. The other key element of a successful CC essay is a clear argument laid out in the scholar's thesis. The essay cannot be just a resuscitation of similarities and differences. It must also attempt to make an argument of whether, ultimately, whatever is being compared is more similar or more different. So for instance, this particular essay, compare and contrast the cultural and economy of the Southern colonies with that of the New England colonies, shouldn't just be a this is different and that is different and this is similar and that is similar. It should really get into the heart of why those similarities and differences are that way to begin with. Why is New England the way it is, and why are the Southern colonies the way they are? It's also important for scholars to understand that they must also have a counter-argument in their essay. So their essay can't just be that overall they're similar and never discuss how they're different or vice versa. It must take a stand. So it must explain that, yes, overall, the New England colonies and the Southern colonies are more different, but it must also have at least one paragraph explaining what some of the differences are, because, of course, there are differences. There will also be a project this unit. It's a group project that revolves around assigning each group a particular colony, and then the groups must create a poster that explains why someone should go to their colony. Think of it like a large travel brochure. The project will require scholars to work together to research important features of their colonies, as well as require scholars to learn how to conduct historical research. When I assign the project, I usually spend some time going over what are good sources and what are bad or dubious sources. I would also spend some time teaching how to properly cite what they find, as they will have to have a works cited page as part of their project. The good news is that teaching citation is pretty easy these days, and there are numerous sites like EasyBib and Citation Machine, and they take almost all of the work out of creating a works cited page. Throughout the unit, I also give them time to work on the project once or twice in class. This might mean the last 15 or 20 minutes of a class. When we're done with the work for the day, however, most of the work will need to be done outside of class. On the day the project is due, scholars will conduct a gallery walk where they will examine each other's projects. Each group will select a docent who will provide information about the visuals as well as answer questions posed by classmates during the gallery walk. This is a fun way to have scholars show off their work without just standing in front of the class for 10 minutes while everyone, and I mean everyone, looks bored. Scholars will be more engaged in each presentation because they will be in smaller groups. They will also be more competitive because they want to have the best project. So you might find that they'll ask some really tough questions for the other colonies. I will use 2 MYP rubrics for this project. Criterion A, knowing and understanding, will focus on the visual itself, while Criterion C, communicating, will be focusing on how they verbally present their project, as well as their ability to accurately cite their sources. I would focus on Criterion C while the gallery walk is happening and go back over the visuals after class with Criterion A. I would also make each criterion 50%, but you can change the weighting of the grades to however you see fit. As usual in Stage 3, I have some ideas of what kinds of differentiation you might want to use, the ATLs I'll be focusing on, and what kinds of activities I'll be doing in the unit. Since we'll be doing a CC essay this unit, I have at least one activity that revolves around using compare and contrast, but I'll also have a few hooks and closing activities that will involve CCs. Try to have a few times in the unit where you'll have scholars working on the CC skill so that they'll be more prepared for the essay. I'd also like for you to think about different strategies you can use each day. I sometimes get in a rut where I'm doing the same 3 or 4 learning strategies all the time. The course structure packet you were given at Collab Day Kickoff has a great list of engaging and diverse types of lesson activities. And I really am not just plugging this. I mean, I'm using it all the time to plan a lesson. So try to change it up as much as possible. It will engage the scholars more, but it will also engage you more. So in this unit, I have a few examples. I'm using an interactive instruction using key points. I'm also using 2 gallery walks, one with the project and one analyzing the images of slavery. I also have some cases where scholars will be using the shared tools strategy as well as group document analysis activity. No matter what you choose, make sure you are engaging scholars in multiple ways. For our day-to-day section, I'd like to point out Lesson 1 because it is one of my AMLs. I really like this lesson a lot as it involves some fun provocation where I question the legitimacy of Disney movies. Yes, the kids boo me when I do this, but it sticks with kids throughout the year. The lesson also involves historical investigation where scholars will analyze a colonial Virginia gravesite using inference to uncover what the gravesite tells us about the people that lived there so long ago. It's fun and engaging for the kids as well as us. Lastly, I'd like to encourage you to use the reflection portion of the unit plans. Every year at the end of a unit, I would think, nope, don't need to do that. And then every new school year, I wish I had because I'd already forgotten what worked and what didn't work in the unit. I tell myself I'll remember for next year, but since I didn't write it down, it's gone. So this is me encouraging you, as well as myself, to fill it out, even once you've moved on to the next unit. Your future self will thank you for it. Well, that's it for Unit 2, APUSHers. Be good out there, and I'll see you back for Unit 3.